It took me a long time to accept the reality of global warming. And I think that the reason it did is because this conversation that we have in America about global warming isn't done on a sort of basic logical premise. Instead, it's become this political thing, this tribal thing. And conversations about global warming tend to drip with condescension. People on one side look down their noses at people on the other and say, surely you can understand that really what's happening is, and people on the other side look down their noses with just as much condescension and say things like, you should come to our side. We have all the data and the scientists and the celebrities. We have cookies, come to our side. And I think both sides have understood that most people don't really want a scientific conversation about these things. Most people are turned off by this. But some of us still have traumatic memories from high school where popularity contests were consumed every waking moment, and we are allergic to that conversation. So I struggled with this topic. I really wanted to understand one of these big questions of our age, of global warming. And I finally came to a clear understanding of it, a clear understanding that I feel I can hold in my hand all at one time, from the most unlikely source. It was when I was researching bananas. I'm a teacher. Teach lessons about science and other things, and I wanted to help my students understand where bananas came from. And I realized that I could get a great distance into that question by asking them a weird, simple question. And here's what it is. When you lose weight, where does it go? So I go around the Seattle area and I talk to groups of students about this. And when I ask that question, there's always this silence that greets me. And I can see what they're thinking. They're thinking, this person is a lunatic. And right now is my one chance to escape the rest of this conversation. So they're thinking about bolting. But if they stay, eventually someone, usually near the front of the class, will raise his or her hand and say, well, you burn it. It just goes away. But atoms can't just disappear. I know most of us think about that when we burn away, it just disappears, but atoms can't disappear. Fat and weight is made out of atoms. So that doesn't make sense. I tell them that, and now they're even more quiet. Until finally, someone, usually in the back of the room, raises his hand and just yells out, "Poop!" Which is exciting because now we're going places. Fat's made of atoms, poop is made of atoms, so it makes perfect sense once you really understand atoms that poop could be where the weight goes. And it turns out, in fact, that scientists used to think that we just pooped all of the weight out until some enterprising scientists a few hundred years ago had the thought to weigh all of the food that a child ate and then weigh all of the poop that the child made, and to compare those two weights. And what they found was that the weight was much more than the poop. The majority of the weight was not going out through the poop. So where was it going? And now the students are very turned on. They're very excited. And they're realizing that if it leaves the body, it must leave the body as atoms, some sort of substance. They're just listing off all of the ways that somebody can take weight off themselves. Is it that they're cutting their hair? Is it that they're trimming their fingernails? Is it that their skin is flaking off? Is it blood? Is it something liquid shooting out of their eyes? What is going on? They're peeing themselves out. We take each of these in turn and dismiss them, knock them down, until always finally some student says, "Do you breathe it out?" And here everything stops, because that is such a stupid idea. You breathe yourself out. Breath is just breath. It's not stuff. It's not fats. But if you remember back to high school science, you might remember that when we breathe out CO2. And what we're made of mostly is carbon, is C. What trees breathe in is CO2. And what they breathe out is O2. They strip the C off of it, take the carbon atom off of every piece of CO2, and just spit back out the rest of it. The oxygen, which we breathe in and then give out our CO2. And so there's this backwards and forwardsness to all of this. We breathe ourselves out. We breathe out what we are made of. We breathe out our fat, we breathe out our other substances. We breathe ourselves out, it gets swallowed up by trees. Trees grab it out of the air to live, to make themselves. Back to bananas, this is where bananas come from. When the banana tree, it's a bush, but it looks like a tree, so it's a tree. When the banana tree was a tiny little seed, it was like this big, and then it got all of these atoms on it. Where did it get those atoms to make the bananas? It got them out of the air. How did they get in the air? They came in the air because of us. The banana tree got its atoms from you. We are the source of bananas. And it's the cycle, and then we eat the banana, and that's how we get the atoms back into ourselves, and we grow big and fat, and then we breathe ourselves out, and then the tree's swallowed up again. It's the cycle. When you realize this, you realize that whenever you're next to wood, you can touch wood, and what you are touching are atoms that used to be in people, possibly people that you know. You are communing with people down through the ages who breathed themselves out into the atmosphere, were swallowed up by trees and branches and whatnot, by leaves, and then we chopped down those things or ate them to make our houses or make our food. What does this have to do with global warming? A lot of the trees were buried millions of years ago, pressed down into the ground, all of their carbon atoms. Then we dug them up. Now they're coal, now they are oil, and we've brought them back into the atmosphere again. So there's more carbon atoms in the atmosphere than ever there were before. Carbon is a blanket. Carbon absorbs sunlight. Even when we can't see it, it still absorbs sunlight, it still gets hot. And a blanket is fine. If we have no carbon in the atmosphere, then we freeze to death, life would end up being very unpleasant. But too much of a blanket isn't good either. It gets you too hot. We're making a thicker and thicker blanket for ourselves. And that's no good either. So what do I mean by all this? First, students yelling poop from the back of a classroom is a good sign that excellent teaching and understanding is going on. And second, if you want to convince somebody of global warming, drop the spite, drop the superiority, and focus on a clear helping the other person build a clear understanding that they can hold in their head. Thank you.